Take out your Bibles, please. Open them up to the book of Luke. We're in chapter 11 still. We're finishing up chapter 11 today, so we have a little bit longer reading. Chapter 11, we're going to read verses 33 through verse 54. If you have one of our Luke journals, it's on page 90. Page 90. We're going to read quite a bit this morning, so stick with me as I read this. Luke chapter 11, 33 through 54, and this is what it says. I'm going to wait till I don't hear pages because that's music. Pages turning. Very good. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it in a cellar or under a basket. This is Jesus speaking, by the way, but on a stand so that those who enter may see the light. Your eye is the lamp of the body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. But when it is bad, your body is full of darkness. Therefore, be careful lest the light in you be darkness. If then your whole body is full of light, having no part dark, it will be wholly bright, as when a lamp with its rays gives you light. While Jesus was speaking, a Pharisee asked him to dine with him. So he went in and reclined at the table. The Pharisee was astonished to see that he did not first wash his hands before dinner. And the Lord said to him, "Now you Pharisees cleanse the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness, you fools. Did not he who made the outside make the inside also? But give as alms those things that are within, and behold, everything is clean for you. But woe to you, Pharisees! You tithe mint and rue and every herb, and neglect justice and the love of God. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. Woe to you, Pharisees, for you love the best seat in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplace. Woe to you, for you are like unmarked graves, and people walk over them without knowing it." One of the lawyers answered him, "Teacher, in saying these things you insult us also." And he said, "Woe to you lawyers also, for you load people with burdens hard to bear, and you yourselves do not touch the burden with one of your fingers. Woe to you, for you build the tombs of the prophets whom your fathers killed. So you are witnesses, and you consent to the deeds of your fathers, for they killed them, and you build their tombs. Therefore also the wisdom of God said, I will send them prophets and apostles, some of whom they will kill and persecute, so that the blood of all the prophets shed from the foundation of the world may be charged against this generation. From the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the sanctuary. Yes, I tell you, it will be required of this generation. Woe to you, lawyers, for you have taken away the key of knowledge. You did not enter yourselves, and you hindered those who were entering." As he went away from there, the scribes and the Pharisees began to press him hard and to provoke him to speak about many things, lying in wait for him to catch him in something he might say. What a dinner guest, right? That's quite a passage here with the 1-2 punch. We've been looking at the teachings of Jesus, and today we see Jesus teaching about integrity. All of these things line up into integrity in this longer passage we had. Now, can I just tell you something? The first part of this passage is one of those that you look at, and sometimes you read this, and I don't know if you're honest enough, but as you read through those first parts about the eye and all that, you read it and go, what? What is Jesus saying here? Not the very first part. The very first part is pretty self-evident, where he says, no one after lighting a lamp puts it in a cellar or under a basket, but on a stand so that those who enter may see the light. Okay, we know that. We're very familiar with that part, at least that first verse there, especially because Jesus used that phrase more than once. You may not realize that, but you read it here and it's a little different. You read it there a little different. It's because Jesus used that phrase more than once, kind of like he did, "He that has ears to hear, let him hear." So this is one of those phrases he would throw out. We know we said it twice for sure. The one that most of us are familiar with actually comes from the Beatitudes. Matthew 5:14 through 16, Jesus said this, and this is what's going to sound familiar to you. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to the whole house. That sounds like what he just said. But there he adds this, let your light so shine before men in such a way that they see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. That's the one we're used to, where he's telling us, hey, go out and live this life that lets the glory of God show through your life. And we sing, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. And we are very familiar with that passage, but this one is not the same passage. He's actually talking about something different here. He is using the phrase again here, and it seems that he is talking about his own works and the things he's been doing as the light. He is actually talking about himself and the light that they should be seeing because of the things that he has been saying to them and the things he has been doing to them. And he's saying, I'm keeping the light out here where you can all see what's going on. And that's where the next part And that's where you come to the next part of this in verses 36 through 34, which you read that and it gets a little confusing. He says, your eye is the lamp of the body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. But when it is bad, your whole body is full of darkness. Therefore be careful lest the light in you be darkness. If then your whole body is full of light, having no part dark, it will be wholly bright, as when a lamp with its rays gives you light. Now, how many of you can be honest enough to say, you may read over that and say, well, that's good, Lord. I really have no idea what you're saying, you know? That's kind of how I looked at that when I start preparing weeks ahead of time and it's like, I don't know that really makes any sense. And so I have to do a lot of studying. That's the way it was, especially if you read it in the version we grew up in. You grew up in the King James Version. Now listen to this. This is really cryptic. Listen to this. The light of the body is the eye. Therefore, when the eye is single, the whole body is full of light. But when thine eye is evil, the body is also full of darkness. Does that make sense to anybody in here? It took me some digging, I'll be honest. It's very cryptic. And, you know, I almost thought when the translators were doing that way back in 1611, right? They're translating and they're talking about this and they're going back and forth over and there. I don't really know what it means. Just put it in there. It's what he said. Somebody will figure it out later. But we're going to get it in there very accurately. It's very literal translation there, and that makes it more difficult to understand. That's where these translations, when you read them, one says this, one says that, because they're really trying to translate it into something that makes sense. This is why we have some of the new translations. I mean, it calls the eyes the light of the body, and as a kid I would hear that and I'd think, man, you got glowing eyes. And it's like, that's a little weird, right? But that's not what he's saying. Like I said, it took some digging to figure out what Jesus was really getting at here and what he was saying to these crowds who had come around him and just heard him give them his greatest sign, which was what? Remember all the way back to last week. Yeah, rising from the dead. His resurrection was to be his greatest sign. He'd been telling them about that. He'd been sharing all these teachings with them. And so here, on the heels of that, as he's still speaking, he starts talking about this light. One point we see here is very true. Your eyes are really important. Your eyes are very important. In a couple weeks here, I have to go for my annual eye exam, which I used to skip. And I used to think, they're fine, right? So last year I go to my first annual exam and have them look at my eyes. And they take that blue light and they poke you in the eye, you know, and they put all these drops in here and they're looking at you and they're doing all this stuff. And the doctor, she's looking at me and she goes, does anybody in your family have glaucoma? And I said, no. And so she said, well, because your eyes are prone to it. I can see it in there. Now, since nobody in your family has had glaucoma, I'm not going to worry about it, and we'll just keep going, and we'll just keep an eye on it. And then I'm driving home from there, and I realize, wait, my grandpa was blind. He had glaucoma. You know, it's like, so I had to go home and call the doctor. And, you know that thing I said about nobody had glaucoma? Well, I forgot all those memories I had where my grandpa, he couldn't see anything, so he would sit out on the front porch and he would have his old transistor radio going and the Detroit Tigers going. It brings that memory back all the time in the spring when my neighbor, who likes to listen to the Tigers baseball on his radio too, I'll hear that and it's like, sounds just like when Grandpa was listening to it. But your eyes are really important, and it's like I neglected them for years. You can't do that. They're too important. It's one of the things Jesus is getting at here is it's very important how well we see. And that's what he is talking about with your eyes and letting light into your body, your perception and what comes in. When you figure it out, Jesus is really pointing out how important your eyesight is. And all these things were happening around all these people and all these very religious people. And you know how much of it they were seeing? Really seeing none of it. It was going right on by them. I talked last week about all the signs they'd already had, all the things they'd already seen, stopping storms, raising the dead, feeding thousands from a sack lunch, and all these things. And then they're sitting there saying, Jesus, give us a sign. No wonder he starts talking about eyesight. He's saying, are you blind? That's what he's really talking about here. They just weren't seeing it. It wasn't getting inside them. The light of Christ was coming to them, and it's like they just couldn't see it. That's why he said when your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. It gets inside. So he's not talking about your eyes being a light to send out, but your eyes being the light that lets things in. Lighting up you on the inside. Because when he says when your eyesight is bad, your body is full of darkness. A healthy eye is one that is singular and clear. That's literally what the King James has there, and that is the exact translation. It is the opposite, though, of having double vision. Anybody had double vision for a while or anything like that? That's got to be rough. Make you nauseous, I don't know, but you just can't see because you got double vision, and that's exactly the opposite of what he said. Now, in the old translation, it said if your eye is evil. Interestingly, Luke used that term 5 times in these verses we're reading. But in the context he's given, it means your eye is diseased. If your eyes are diseased, the truth is not getting in. And he's saying, you guys have seen me do all these things, you've heard me say all these things, and it's not sinking in. And it should be. You should be seeing these things, and it should be getting deep down inside you, and you're not getting it. Of course, Jesus is referring to seeing things in a spiritual sense and letting the truth get inside them, and that's what they're missing. He is radiating it all around, the light of Christ, and it's all around us, and we see things all around us every day, and these people were just imperceptive, and that's what we must not be. We cannot be imperceptive of what God is doing and what he is showing us and what he is saying. That is why he said to them, therefore be careful lest the light in you be darkness. You can think you're full of light and you're full of darkness because you're not seeing the light of Christ. The clear eye lets in the light of Christ. The tainted eye changes the light and makes it dark or dim, and the light of Christ never gets inside. And his big point through all these verses is what is inside us and what we are filled with inside is what counts. What counts is what's inside more than what's outside. And that brings us to what Jesus is trying to get across to them in the broader passage. What is inside is what counts. That's why I said the light that is in you. It's all about integrity. Integrity. The word integrity comes from the word to integrate or integrated, and that is how things are brought together and put together and held together. They are integrated like that. Integrity, it is the opposite of disintegrating. You got integrate and you got disintegrate. If somebody hits you with a disintegrator ray, what happens? Hopefully that doesn't happen. But someday it'll be possible. You turn into little particles and you come apart and you disappear. And that is the opposite of how you're put together. Integrity is how you're put together. Integrity is about being solid and consistent. If you've got a gold bar and you want to know that it is a solid gold bar, you've got to cut into it and see. You want to make sure. I mean, you get the Easter bunnies are all on the shelves now already, because it's only, a month and a half till Easter, so the bunnies got to be out. And, you got to watch because some of them are hollow. What a rip. You see this big old bunny, you see, as a kid, you'd see the big one, right? And it's hollow, and you get more chocolate in the little one that's solid. Integrity is when you are what you are through and through. I always like the white bunnies myself. I'm kind of partial to white chocolate. Not that I'm hinting. It's okay. I've always loved the definition, maybe not like, but love, because I can love things I don't like. The definition of integrity, this one, it is who you are when no one is looking. When you're all alone, and what you do and the way you act when no one is looking, that's who you really are on the inside. Because that is when what is inside comes out. We have a couple of quality engineers, at least 3 here. I don't know, Logan, is that what you are? Okay, I was going to have to change my count. That was going to mess me up, I know we have at least a few quality engineers in here, and sometimes, I'm not a quality engineer. I'm less than quality. No, I'm the one who gives them nightmares because I'm the one who dreams up solutions and sells them, and then the engineers have to make it work, and the quality engineers have to say, yes, it did work. They have to rubber stamp my work and stuff like that. So I'm not on that, but I know what they do, and a lot of times we'll work with welds and we'll work other parts and stuff like that. And there's a few tests we perform to test the integrity of a weld. One is easy. We do a connectivity test, and what we do is we put a probe on this side of the weld and a probe on this side of the weld. We run current through it and say, how much current is it reading? Is it showing resistance? If it's showing resistance, it's not a good weld. Then heat builds up there and it ruins everything. So we can check that and we can see how good the weld is to a certain point. And we look at these things. If I have integrity, am I giving resistance to God? One of the tests we do, it's a destructive test. See, the conductivity test is a non-destructive test. There's a couple destructive tests we do, and one of them, we'll take a saw and we'll take it right through the weld area and we'll cut it right in half, and it ruins the part. Can't go to the customer and say, here, paste these together and you can have a part. We can't do that. We have welded it and now we're cutting it through. And then we look at the cross section of it. We look at it from the end and we see how deep did the weld penetrate in. But we have to destroy the part to do it, to see what's inside. And the third one, we do a pull test and we put that part on a machine and it gauges how much pressure and it pulls them apart until it rips them apart. And usually that will always destroy the part too. And we see how much can the part hold up under before it falls apart. And that tells us the integrity. And that one destroys the part. How many of you have ever felt like God has either cut you in half or pulled you apart like that? Life gets hard, doesn't it, sometimes? And I feel like I'm just being ripped apart. And you know what? God is showing me what my integrity is at that time. He is testing my integrity, seeing what's on the inside of me, and He puts me under pressure or puts me under stress or duress. And in that, He can see, He can always see inside me, right? God always knows how far it is. Who's He really showing what my integrity is? Me, that's right. He has to pull me apart so I can look and say, wow, I really failed there. We do it. He wants to know what's inside us beyond the appearances. See, and the Pharisees were very big on appearances and what people saw. We have to be careful because we have also fallen into that trap many times in the sense of preserving our witness, right? So we'll act one way in front of everybody and another way when they're not there. I remember when back in the late 60s and early 70s when all of us good Baptists had our TVs on wheels. So you could push it out of the room when people came over, right? Because we didn't want to corrupt our testimony. You couldn't go to movies, you know why? Because they might think you're going to a bad movie. And we were worried about what people saw. Should have been more worried about what we saw. Isn't that the truth of it? This is what Jesus is talking about here. Sometimes that's the kind of pressure and stuff that Jesus puts on that we need to get down to just what there is inside of us. But take heart, because what God tears, He heals. And you are better afterward. Turn with me to Isaiah chapter 6. We've been here a lot of times. This is just such a pivotal chapter of the Bible. Isaiah 6, we're going to read verses 5, 6, and 7, but this is the one I've shared with you before, where Isaiah comes into the temple after the king has died, and he sees Jesus there on his throne. His train is filling the temple. And Isaiah is sharing this experience with us. Isaiah, one of the greatest prophets of the Old Testament. Isaiah 6, verses 5, 6, and 7. And he says then, this is his response to seeing the Lord in the temple. He says, then I said, what? Woe is me, for I am ruined. And the word there would literally be disintegrated. I have fallen apart. Because I'm a man of unclean lips. And I live among a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. He's so holy that I'm just coming apart in front of him. And this is a prophet of God speaking. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a burning coal in his hand, which he had taken from the altar with tongs. And he touched my mouth and said, and it said, behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away, and your sin is forgiven. I have to think there was a moment of searing flesh when that coal touched his lips, because think of it, the angelic being touched it with what? Tongs. It's like, oh, I don't know. But Isaiah took it, and he was purged, and he was changed. Whatever God tears in testing our integrity, He heals and restores. He is doing it to show us what we need, and then He heals us. And we are better for what He has done. Isaiah went from saying, I'm a man of unclean lips and I'm coming apart before God, to this angelic being saying to him, your iniquity is taken away and your sin is forgiven, to where then he could hear the voice of God, and God said, who will I send, and who's going to go to speak to this people? And what did Isaiah say then? Here am I, send me. He's changed and restored and made better than he was before he went to through the test. Turn with me to Hosea 6, verses 1 through 3. It's a passage I share often because I love this. It shows so much of what God does in us. Hosea 6, verses 1 through 3. Hosea is writing to Israel, who is wandering away from the Lord here, and he says, come, let us return to the Lord, to Yahweh, for He has torn us, but He will what? Heal us. He has wounded us, but He will bandage us. He will revive us after 2 days, and He will raise us up on the third day. Doesn't that sound oddly familiar? Raise us up on the third day, that we may live before Him. So let us press on to know the Lord. His going forth is as certain as the dawn, and He will come to us like the rain, like the spring and the latter rain, watering the earth. It's such a beautiful passage. Again, what He tears, He heals. It's the picture of the shepherd who had a sheep who would keep wandering off. And the shepherd would take that sheep, and it had to be so hard because he would take it and snap its leg, because it wouldn't quit wandering off. And it kept wandering off. Is either going to fall into a chasm or get eaten by a wolf or something like that. And so he would break its leg. And it hurt the lamb. And this is exactly what he's talking about. But then this loving shepherd, you know what he would do? He would take that lamb and he would put it over his shoulders, and he would carry it everywhere it needed to go until it healed. And when it healed, you know what that lamb would do? It would never leave that shepherd's side. That's the picture of this passage. So when He puts us through this testing, when He puts us testing our integrity, and He gets down to what's inside us, and it hurts and all of this, but then He bandages us and He heals us. That's why He says, let's not run away from the Lord, but let's press on to know Him. It's so hard to do that, isn't it? You think you want to run away. Is this some mean God? No, he loves you, and that's why he's testing your integrity and showing you your faults and your weaknesses. And so now let's press in to know him instead of running away. Sometimes this is the only way to see what's inside us and find what is broken, like an eye that doesn't see right, and fix it. And that is usually what he's doing, showing us what is wrong on the inside and what needs fixed. And that is where Jesus goes with the scribes and the Pharisees in the rest of these verses that we read this morning. It kind of comes to a living example there of what's on the inside. Verse 37 tells us that a Pharisee, after hearing Jesus say all these things, thought it'd be a good idea to invite Jesus over for dinner while he was talking about Jonah and the sign and the eyes and the light. Hey, why don't you come over for dinner, Jesus? And you know what? Jesus went. Look at verse 38 with me. The Pharisee, this is interesting, the Pharisee was astonished to see that he did not first wash before dinner. He's like, okay, come on over for dinner, Jesus. But it's not just that he's kind of put off by it and saying, Jesus didn't wash his hands. It says he's astonished at it. He was amazed that Jesus didn't wash his hands. And it's not because he thought Jesus was a cleaner person than that. It's like, surely, Jesus, you wash your hands before you eat, right? Everybody washes their hands before they eat. It's not that. It was a ceremonial kind of washing that the Jews would practice, and you would have to hold your hands over the bowl, and first you'd do it this way with one hand, and then you do it and you had these little things you would say that you were doing because the Pharisees believed that through these outward actions and the way I'm washing my hands on the outside helps keep me free from sin on the inside. And that's what Jesus did not do. In fact, some of your translations may even say he did not ceremonially wash at that time. It was a ceremonial way. They thought that doing things on the outside could help keep sin away on the inside. And Jesus didn't follow this very important ceremony to keep him free of sin. You see, like I said, the Pharisees were all about the external and what people see. And he did not see Jesus do this. Jewish faith is honestly still like that a lot. I heard a Jewish man and a Christian man sit down for a really interesting talk about this. And the Jewish guy is saying, well, to us it doesn't matter what's on the inside. It matters what you do. You can think, you can feel, you can, all these things as long as you don't act on it. And that's the way it was here too. And he's like, but you Christians always worry about what you're feeling and thinking and all these things that are going on the inside. And the other guy's like, right. And that's why it was so earth-shaking when Jesus said to them things like, you've heard the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder, but whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. And he says, but I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. He's getting to the inside, isn't he? Jesus said, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. It's on the inside. And that was earth-shaking to the Jewish believers. It was radical. And they carry this so far that they would think that an external action like washing your hands in a certain way and saying a certain set of words would keep sin and impurity away from them. So Jesus tries to get this across to the Pharisee. Look at verses 39 and 40. He says this, it says, and the Lord said to him, now you Pharisees cleanse the outside of the cup and of the dish, but the inside you are full of greed and wickedness. You fools, like how he mixes his words with them? Did not he who made the outside make the inside also? This makes sense, doesn't it? Do you care more if the inside of the cup is clean or the outside? Good, it wasn't a trick question. I kind of prefer both. I do prefer both. Years and years and years ago, I worked at Starbucks, and I got to tell you, the ladies would come there. It's almost always the ladies that would use the real cups instead of the paper ones, and so we would have to wash those. There was always lipstick on them, and it's always kind of exactly the face I make. Exactly. It's like, oh man, and you got to scrub it off before you put it in the dishwasher, or it won't come off. That stuff, they should pave roads with it. It doesn't come off. And you look at that and it's like, I'm not drinking out of that, I prefer both. But you definitely want the inside clean before you drink out of it. But see, if you're all about what everybody sees, man, you can buff, you can polish, you can get that glass looking all good or that cup looking all good on the outside, and inside have like 3 weeks of grounds. Never wash that cup. Just wipe the outside.
Was he saying one was more important though?
Yes, the inside's more important. The inside is definitely more important than the outside. I prefer both in my cups. But in our lives, what is inside, you know why? Because what is inside will eventually drive what is outside. And their failure to see Christ properly and let the light of Christ in was driving their outward actions. Yes. You're probably familiar with verse 42. He says to them, "But woe to you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and every herb, and neglect justice and the love of God. These you ought to have done without neglecting the other." See, there's both of them together. And here's that word, woe, again. Remember I told you last week that woe is a word that a prophet would say when he came into a community and he was pronouncing the judgment of God, the rejection of God on them. He would say woe. The opposite would be to say blessed. And Jesus used those two words a lot to communicate that as a prophet of God, as God himself, but he was also a prophet of God. But Jesus stands as a prophet proclaiming the judgment and the rejection of God on these men who thought they had it all figured out when he says, "Woe to you." Tax on fools, which makes it pretty strong too. But you can see how serious this delusion of theirs was about the outward work saving themselves. But then he talked about tithing, the nth degree of the little physical details of their life. They were bringing in their herbs and counting out, I've got my oregano, I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 for me, 1 for God. You're going to go through your whole spice rack. You're going to be busy for a while, but that's the way they were. And they were counting out the leaves and giving God 1 out of 10 leaves. I am on target with God. And you're forgetting justice and mercy and compassion and love. We went through the prodigal son, not prodigal son, that's coming up, that's one of my favorites, but we went through the Good Samaritan a few weeks ago, and the most amazing thing to me was when that Samaritan came along, that hated individual, and saw that Jewish guy laying there, and it says he saw him and felt compassion on him. It started inside, which should have been the hardest part for him. Look back at verse 41. Jesus tells him this, "But give as alms those things that are within, and behold, everything is clean for you." Start with the inside. You're worrying about these leaves. God wants a heart that is given to him and sensitive to others and their needs, and that's what he wants to see. Once again, Jesus is directing them to look at what's on the inside. If you want to be clean, get clean inside. And the scribes and the Pharisees, they were catching on, but they weren't liking it too much. And that's why one of the lawyers piped up then at this dinner and said, "Teacher, in saying these things, you insult us also." Well, Jesus, you're not being nice. Where's Jesus tender, meek, and mild? This hurts. But really, he's saying, you're telling the Pharisees that, and that's all good, Jesus, but you're kind of dragging us down with him. And Jesus changes his direction to talk to the scribes, the lawyers, the ones who figure out the law. He doesn't just back off. He actually doubles down on it. 6 times in this passage, he speaks as the prophet proclaiming the doom and their rejection of God by saying, "Woe to you." Now, I read this and I want to hit this one cautionary moment here because people look at this and they say, "See, Jesus didn't like religious people." I've heard people say that. No, Jesus didn't like falsely religious people. People who put on a show for others but have no light within themselves. That's what he had no tolerance for. That's why he said, "Woe to you, you are like unmarked graves, and people walk over them without knowing it." Matthew amplifies it, that phrase, and tells us this, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites," that's an amplification, For you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear to be beautiful, but inside they are full of dead men's bones and uncleanness. We're getting ready we're going to have the Christ in Passover here in a few weeks, and they were getting close to Passover time there. And one of the things the Jews used to do is they'd go through the territory and they would paint all the tombstones so that somebody didn't accidentally walk across one of them and become ceremonial unclean, because you want to be ready for the Passover. So they wanted to point out, oh, there's a tomb, there's a tomb, there's a tomb, there's a tomb, and they would paint them, they would whitewash them, and it would make them pretty. And Jesus says, you can take this grave, you can put on whatever kind of pretty stone you want, you can paint it any way you want, you can build a mausoleum if you want, and it can be beautiful on the outside, but on the inside it's death and decay and rotting and darkness. And he's saying, and that's you. Pulling his punches pretty good here. Not at all. And he hits them on a few things here. He tells the lawyers, you're coming up with all kinds of rules. You make it so hard for people to follow, and you don't lift a finger to help them. He's telling them, you guys build monuments to the prophets. That's great, but you're just like your fathers who killed the prophets. They brought the message of God, they brought the light to you, and you killed them for it, and you're no different. He said it's bad enough, and he even says it's bad enough you can't see this for yourself down there in verse 50, but you have twisted the truth so that others can't see it either. You have just muddled the whole thing up, and nobody can see the light of Christ, the light of God, because you've made it so complicated. But you love to be seen as the spiritual leader. He said earlier, they love to sit in the highest seats in the synagogue where everybody could see them. Then you know what he did? He stopped talking and he left. He delivered his message to them and he left. And what was inside the scribes and the Pharisees came out more and more. They committed themselves even more. They didn't say, oh man, he's pulled us apart, but he's trying to help us. No, they committed themselves even more to tripping him up and wanting to trap him. Look at verses 53 and 54. What an ending for this section. As he went away, as he's walking away and they start talking, the scribes and the Pharisees began to press him hard to provoke him to speak about many things, lying in wait for him to catch him in something he might say before he's even gone. Jesus brought the light to the scribes and the Pharisees, and they couldn't see it. It should have been so obvious by now with all the things he's done. Not only could they not see it, but they hated it, and it made them angry, and they hated him for it. And they were steering other people away from him and the light. But that is because of what was deep down inside them. I've heard people use this illustration, and I've heard this, you probably heard this one too, but if you're at work, and you're walking around, you got your cup of coffee, and you're going from the coffee machine back to your desk, and you got to walk fast and look concerned. That's how you're a good employee, right? You just walk fast and look concerned, and everybody thinks you're so busy. Don't bother him. He must be working on something really important. And you go blowing around the corner, and there's somebody there, and you slam on the brakes, but you hit him with the coffee cup. What comes out of the cup on them? Coffee. You know why? Because that's what the cup was filled with. When we run up against people, it's the same thing. We run into somebody in life. We run into one of these tests, and what spills out is what we're filled with. And that can show us a lot about ourselves. Big point. Are you able to see clearly the light of Christ? Like the scribes and the Pharisees, the signs are all around us too. There are so many things pointing us to Christ. His word is constantly coming to us. But the question is it getting in? Down deep inside. I think the main phrase out of all these words that we read together this morning are where Jesus said this, therefore be careful lest the light in you be darkness. What's deep down inside? That is the key to integrity, and that is the difference between hypocrisy and true religion. And we're about to take communion together. And as we go into this, I want us to recall what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11:28. He says, and this is our time for this, he says, "But a man must examine himself, and in so doing he is to eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For he who eats and drinks judgment to himself if he does not judge the body rightly." Before we go into this, remembering his great sacrifice and how he loved us, let's take a few moments and let's just examine ourselves. What's on the inside? If I run up against somebody today, what's going to spill out? Is the light of Christ getting in? That's that whole discerning the body. Is the light of Christ getting into me?